Welcome back to another episode of the Stigma podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Hayes, and today's guest is Elyse Cohen. Elyse is the VP of Social Impact and Inclusion at Rare Beauty by Selena Gomez. And prior to that, she worked in the White House for First Lady Michelle Obama as Deputy Director of the Let's Move effort. She's worked on social impact and policy initiatives at the Public Health Institute and in a variety of other social impact roles over an amazing career as a social impact leader. She's really somebody who I would say gets it when it comes to doing good. And Elyse shared with me recently and in this episode about her personal reasons for being motivated to drive social change, and especially around mental health. She talks to us today about what the Rare Impact Fund is, part of the Rare Beauty family, and what it's going to be doing in the mental health space. And I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. So let's just get right into it. Elyse, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here and have certainly been following along through your journey and through this podcast, and just delighted to participate.
Awesome. I'd like to start by having you maybe share with our audience a little bit about who you are and your bio and background in this amazing career that you've had in social impact. You've worked at the White House. You're now working with Selena Gomez. You're doing all of these incredible things. I'd love to hear about your story, how you ended up in social impact the way you have, and what you're doing at Rare Beauty.
Sure. Well, so my career has really spanned public, private, and government sectors, but really all through that lens: social impact, marketing, partnerships, campaigns that leverage assets and generate change. So there are moments where those assets are an authentic celebrity and powerful story. There are moments when those assets are brand assets. There are moments when you have the bully pulpit of the White House, having worked for Michelle Obama. And there are moments where you have sort of all of that. And, I've always felt that you can pencil in a career plan, but make sure not to use permanent marker, because, you'll miss those opportunities. And I truly feel like my career has been that not straight line. I moved to Washington, D.C. I was raised by a single mom. And I always think this piece is interesting. I didn't have the parent that said, you can do anything you want to do. I actually had the parent that said, I want to make sure that you know that you have no fallback. So choose wisely and hustle hard. And so I think that some of the biggest opportunities for me came when I least expected it. And so I've really gone through, working at marketing agencies, developing big issue campaigns, being pulled into the White House, right when I sort of finished working a full-time job and being in grad school part-time. And I was like, oh God, I can't take this job now. Of course, I took it, and then really shifted and worked with a lot of companies through consulting and through the Chamber of Commerce Foundation, helping to build brand social impact programs. And at that time, an issue that was so meaningful to me and so personal was that of mental health. My own family had struggled. I was a caretaker on the front lines of a family member through many, many, ups and downs and hospitalizations. And I often felt like no matter where I worked and no matter the power, the platform, the relationships, the systems felt broken. And it just felt like we needed more players in this space. And so through that, I worked with many companies and brought companies to the table on how can they address mental health for employees, and how can they also be more aware and contribute externally in the community impact space. And so I knew when I left that job, I wanted to be at a brand that understood the importance of this work and could use their power in that platform in that way. And I never, ever imagined moving to Los Angeles. I was on my way from Washington, D.C. to a job in New York, and the pandemic hit, and that job sort of fizzled. And here I am at Rare Beauty, which is a beauty brand that Selena Gomez founded with the mission and the purpose of addressing mental health and self-acceptance, using her brand platform, using the beauty industry, and using her own authentic, powerful story and her own struggles with mental illness.
So what exactly is Rare Beauty, and why is being a purpose-driven brand so important?
I think in the past 10 to 12 years, there's been a real shift in purpose-driven brands and, that companies are not just here to sell products, but are really also here to be both profitable and purpose-driven and sort of address societal issues. And so when Selena launched Rare Beauty, she knew that she wanted it to be more than a beauty brand. She'd been in a makeup chair since she was young, and she'd struggled with her own mental health and influence from others. And so from the get-go, our founder said, I want this brand to be one that addresses mental health, it is built into the core DNA of the company. And so our brand itself launched last September 2020 in the middle of a pandemic. We sell makeup products, but 1 month before the launch of the brand and any products were really on the shelf, she launched what's called the Rare Impact Fund, which is essentially a 501c3 to address access and gaps in mental health. And so the brand donates 1% of all of our sales. So whenever someone shops with Rare Beauty, whether that's at Sephora, our retail partner, or that's online, 1% of all of these sales are going to the fund. And then we also raise additional money with investors, philanthropists, corporate partners, our own community, with this goal of raising a lot of money over the next 10 years. Our hope is 100 million over the next 10 years, which is an ambitious goal. But we really create a strategic grant making strategy that's focused on supporting on the ground organizations that address mental health and education. So helping to bring educational resources around mental health to school. So just like someone would learn about physical education or math or science, we want them to learn more about emotions and mental health. We want to help expand practitioner pipelines and make sure that folks that touch young people in any parts of their life, from out on the playing field, maybe it's a coach, to an after school program, that there are more people equipped to understand and recognize and be trained in mental health prevention and then suicide and crisis response. And so the fund really focuses on a strategic grant making process around that area. We are a global brand. We expanded internationally last week, which is really, really exciting. And so as the brand expands, the funding expands. But something that I'm personally even more excited about is that it's not just about the financial resources. We see Rare Beauty as such a unique platform when you take someone like Selena Gomez and the reach that she has and the story she has, and you take the issue of mental health, where you and I both know that storytelling and people's stories are such an important part of shifting stigma. We really, we work to elevate stories through our own platform and reach and provide educational resources through our social media channels, through a Rare Impact resource site on our website, through thought leadership interviews that we host on our platform, so that we're really going from education, awareness, stigma shifting to that very last piece of financial access, so that once people know they need help and know how to seek that help, money isn't a barrier. So that's the way we really think about it. It's a really holistic approach to addressing mental health. And we work with so many amazing experts and partners day in and day out.
Where are you kind of today with the Rare Impact Fund, and what are next steps, and how can people get involved and be helpful as you grow the Rare Impact Fund?
Thank you. Thank you for asking that question. Of course, I love answering it. Well, certainly you can shop with us, and you can know that when you shop with Rare Beauty on rarebeauty.com or in Sephora retail stores, you are actually supporting the fund. You can also directly support the fund. We actually currently have a GoFundMe that Selena launched, which is at gofundme.com/Rare Impact Fund.
I will link to that in the show notes so people can find it easily.
Awesome. And you can, of course, also find it on rarebeauty.com. We make sure there are many ways to support this important work that we're doing. And we are so grateful for each and every person who has supported this work so far.
That's incredible. So when we had talked before, you've done a lot of research around sort of who's doing what in and around mental health. Can you Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit? Because it's incredible how much homework you've done. I'm truly amazed by it. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, and Stephen, you probably feel this way too. When you have a personal story, a personal experience, all of a sudden you're just looking everywhere. You're looking to find out where resources are. You're looking to find out what companies are addressing things. You're looking to find out what people have experienced, what you've experienced. And so some of my own research has been through my own struggle and my own story, and some has been through channeling that struggle into my own professional career and knowing that we are all more powerful if we work together, and we want to be efficient about how we address and transform the conversation of mental health. So, at this point, there are a handful of companies across industries, from financial institutions to consulting firms. I had spent time working with Bank of America, with Deloitte, all different companies, Starbucks, that, really took on this work, knowing that they needed to address mental health both for their employees and also within their communities. And then there's the phenomenal organizations like NAMI, like the National Council for Mental Wellbeing, and Mental Health America. And I think what is unique is that we have those organizations that are experts in this space, but a young person or a person in crisis isn't actually aware of those organizations. What they're doing is they're turning to celebrities they trust, to brands that they trust. And that's where they're seeking information. And that's where the private sector has such a unique, critical role to actually be doing more than just selling products, but really actually being a resource on an issue. And for us, of course, that's mental health, which, selfishly, and, of course, I'm a bit biased, but I do feel like it is one of the biggest issues of our lifetime. And 1 in 5 people are affected, and even more are supporting someone. So the prevalence of mental health does not align with actual financial investment that is going in to address the issue.
What is causing that misalignment of incentives, if I can call it that?
Yeah, I think that there's been a long history of stigma, right? There's tremendous stigma associated with mental health, though I do think that's changing. I think younger generations don't see it that way. It's actually older generations that have sort of been taught and wired that mental health is different than physical health. We don't talk about it, we don't learn about it. And so there's been this stigma that's been a barrier, although I am so excited to see that shifting. And whether that's been, the pandemic that has kind of catapulted this conversation to headlines, or, it's been the Selenas of the world, it's been the Stevens of the world, right? It's been people that have sort of all stepped in. The stigma is shifting, but I think stigma has been a tremendous barrier. I think that cost of care, whether that's, maintaining good mental health and seeking therapy, or that's, toward the other extreme of hospitalization, the cost of care is a barrier. And I think the system is a little bit broken. I think for many of us who have navigated that system, there have been so many moments along that journey where you have wished, I'll speak for myself, I have wished the system to be easier. I have wished to be able to say, a family member is struggling, can it be as easy as, getting them to care? And it's just not. It's not that easy. There aren't enough beds in hospitals. There aren't enough practitioners. And so those would be the 3 barriers that I think have really sort of prevented this issue from getting the attention it needs. But I am hopeful. And I think that we're having a moment, and we have tremendous opportunity now to work collectively and just transform the barriers that did once exist around mental health. I always say, like, we'd have no problem saying, I need a day off, I have a broken arm. So when we think about it, our brain is the same and is just as important. Why can't we talk about it in that way?
It's interesting you say that. So, obviously we like to talk about stigma here. What do we have to do to really have an impact on stigma? Because I think it's awesome that we're all talking about mental health. It's awesome to see people like Selena talk about her experience. And it certainly opens the door for stigma reduction. What's the next step? What do we have to do to get people to truly internalize what you just said, which is I need to react to when I have a mental health need, I need to react to it the same way I would if I had a physical health need. But I think maybe people haven't really internalized that it's okay to need help.
And, I think that so much of that starts with education, right? When you think about it, and this is a lot of what the Rare Impact Fund is actually supporting, is let's start young. Like, let's start in schools. Let's educate around mental health and incorporate it into a school curriculum. And then from an early age, we're actually learning about it, just like we're learning about physical health. It should be holistic health. It shouldn't be physical and mental. Your brain is part of all the other parts of your body. And I think if we start then, we will truly transform mental health for all the generations to come. And with that, the stigma will drop. We'll have more and more people talking about their mental health and their therapists in the same way that we talk about going to personal training. It'll be one and the same.
I love it. You mentioned education. What are some of the other things? I mean, education being one. What are some of the other areas where the Rare Impact Fund will deploy capital? But maybe what are some examples of where you will want to, or where you have, or where you're going to?
Yeah. So I'm excited to say that in the coming weeks, we'll be supporting 6 additional organizations, and they cover social and emotional learning. They cover the suicide prevention and response piece, I think is critical. I think people don't realize how prevalent suicide is. It's the second leading cause of death in the Gen Z population, and it is preventable. And so the more we can expand training and education of more people, the more we can prevent it. And then the other piece is really sort of local community programming, because we know it's not one size fits all. And we know that in certain communities, stigma is different. In the Black community, in the Latinx community, in the LGBTQ community, a lot of these communities also have higher rates of mental illness. And so we want to deploy capital in areas where it's not one size fits all, and we're supporting on the ground programs that help address mental health in these specific populations. And some of that means helping to expand a practitioner pipeline. People want to go to practitioners that look like them, and there's not enough of that right now. And so we need to help with that. And then I'd say the last piece, and this is something that Selena, our founder, has talked a lot about and has been really important work for her, has been dialectic behavioral therapy. And it's become more and more common, but it is a little bit inaccessible for many populations. And so we also have our eye on how can we expand DBT specifically to make it more accessible to more people.
So one of the things I think about is supply and demand as an investor. I think about where in the market is there a demand for care and where is there not enough supply of it. You had mentioned really 2 things that jumped out at me along those lines. One is this pipeline of practitioners. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on where do we go to support that pipeline? And then I'm also interested to hear a little bit about some of the barriers around DBT that can be resolved by awareness and funding and where you're focused.
So I would say, and again, this is not fact, this is Elyse sort of thinking.
We don't fact check here, so it's totally cool. Don't worry about it.
In terms of the first question, we need to seeking a professional track in therapy, psychiatry, all of that. We need to make that a field that more people want to go into. And we need to actually help also support those practitioners in getting trained. So I think that's one way where we think about how do we diversify? How do we help people go into those professions and make sure it is a diverse population that is going into those professions? So that's the piece there on DBT. So it's been a learning journey for me. Candidly, it was actually not something that I was incredibly familiar with until I started working so closely with our founder and have now worked with several individuals who have specialized in it. And it is a very specific form of training. And there aren't enough practitioners that are actually trained in full DBT. And so part of not having enough practitioners means it's also less accessible. And so we need to help get more people trained in how to deliver DBT so that then it sort of becomes a more common form of therapy that people can seek.
You'd mentioned a couple of times not enough practitioners as well. What do we have to do to get more practitioners? What do we have to do to make people want to work in mental health as a career? Because it just seems like there's just not anywhere near enough of these people.
Again, opinion here. I would say from my own experience, I think part of it and my understanding is that while the system sometimes feels broken to patients and family members going through it, I think practitioners feel the same way. They feel like there's not as much support for them, whether that's through insurance coverage, whether that's through hours, whether that's through pay. And I think that that is one of the reasons that people aren't necessarily flocking to that career field. And so we have to sort of support on both sides. I think we need to put investment in on both sides. Investment in on making the actual system better for patients and families. But in order to do that, we need to make that system better for actual doctors and practitioners.
And you've spent a lot of time thinking about this. You've spent a lot of time looking at this space, both personally and professionally. One of the questions I like to ask, because we invest in mental health solutions, is now that you've done all this homework, where do you see the white space for others who want to create mental health solutions? What glaring holes are there in the care ecosystem outside of number of providers? Where do you, based on what you've researched, think, wow, there's these really obvious opportunities. I wish someone would tackle this or that or the other.
Yep. Yeah. So certainly, obviously, one and the reason we feel so strongly about this is there is no question there is a tremendous gap in the education space. I think you'd ask parents now, you talk to young people, especially going back to school after the pandemic, and there's so much anxiety around it. And young people spend the majority of their time in schools. We need to, and oftentimes that is where they get the most care. For some, that's where they get all of their meals in a day. And so we must think about that environment as a place for prevention, treatment, all of it in the education space. And the data shows that as well. I think that's one. I think the other, which I know you all are familiar with, is certainly that intersection of like technology and AI and mental health. Certainly, we all know that social media and technology can have negative impacts on our health, but it can also actually really facilitate and support mental health, especially from a reach perspective. And we have to keep in mind that there are also barriers to technology. Not everyone has a smartphone. And so I think while we think about the solutions, we have to be really conscious and thoughtful about different populations and making sure that they're, that they are also able to access tech-based solutions. But I do think that that is another really, really hot spot and big area, both from a communication and support perspective, but also from sort of being able to measure data and emotions so that people can actually have more tools in their toolbox to support their own mental health on a daily basis. There's some pretty cool things, I think, going on in that space.
So what are some of these things?
So I think and this is a little bit above my head, but there's a lot of AI, artificial intelligence, and sort of being able to measure and understand the brain, which to me is fascinating. I think one of the biggest challenges, which we haven't talked about as much, is mental health being hard to diagnose and the lag time between seeing certain signs and symptoms and actually getting a formal diagnosis. And part of that is we haven't been able to diagnose based on, what does the brain look like? And so if we're able to have technology that can do that and can even do that earlier and at a younger age, that sets us on such a different path from a diagnosis perspective. And I think that's one of the big challenges in the mental health space is is that lag time in diagnosis. So I think that that's phenomenal from an AI perspective. And I think, look, we're seeing companies, recently Talkspace and in their IPO, we're seeing these programs and these apps and different systems that allow people to seek therapy outside of a traditional office setting. And certainly with severe mental illness, in office setting and, being in consistent communication and seeing a practitioner is critical. I don't want to overlook that. But there are also moments where being able to communicate with a therapist, through text or through a virtual appointment is incredible. And we're now seeing that you can do that and that these companies are really filling a gap there as well. And then the last piece I would say that I don't want to overlook is the ability to create online communities. This is something that we've seen through Rare Beauty. Community is the heart and soul of our brand. And, I think this past year put a finer point on isolation and loneliness and the importance of connection. And younger generations are really seeking connection and community online. They're finding friends, they're meeting with people. And I think that technology and different services can create community in a way that, someone like me, it feels so strange to think about an online community, but it is really a powerful tool for connection and support for mental health.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you completely. What did I miss? What should I have asked about what you're working on? And usually I have to ask that question because I almost always miss something obvious.
This isn't something that I'm working on necessarily. It's more just something that I want to make sure that listeners know is just how prevalent mental health is. It doesn't discriminate. And I think that there's this preconceived notion that it only impacts certain people. And so much of what we're trying to do is show that whether you're Selena Gomez or you're a member of our community that's buying, a lipstick, everyone is impacted. And so it really is such a common issue. And for that reason alone, we should all be looking for solutions and ways to provide more resources around this issue. And I can't believe it's 2021 and we're finally here. So, and then the other thing, this isn't as specific to mental health, but you and I had talked a little bit about this, and especially given the folks that you work with, there's just, we talked a little bit about the power of purpose-driven brands and, those buzzwords and what does that mean? And, what do you mean companies are kind of stepping into societal issues? And because I'm always looking up this stuff, I wanted to mention a couple of things about that and how consumers are more and more seeking brands with purpose. And I read recently that 64% of global consumers find brands that actively communicate their purpose to be more attractive, which is interesting. And 52% said they were more attracted to buy from certain brands over others for something bigger than just the product and the services that it sells. They're looking for something that aligns with their personal values. And this was through an Accenture study. And I think, that's what we're trying to do at Rare Beauty. We don't want our purpose to be separate from our business. It is embedded in the DNA of who we are. And, on our social media channels, you can find us talking about lipstick one day, and the next day we're educating around bipolar disorder. And it's really sort of, goes hand in hand because we see this really unique opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I've really enjoyed having you here to talk with us about what you're working on. And I've really enjoyed getting your thoughts. And I just want to say thank you again for what you've put into social impact broadly and what you're doing for mental health now with your work. So I really enjoyed this conversation. I've enjoyed getting to know you. I am just amazed at what you're doing and grateful for it. So thank you so much, not just for being here today, but for everything that you're doing.
Thank you. And really, truly, thank you, because I just remember reading your story years ago through LinkedIn. And then that's actually how a member of your team reached out to us. So this was all meant to be. I'm really excited. And thanks for all the work that you're doing as well. This was wonderful.
Thank you again, Elyse, for being here today and for sharing with us and for your commitment to social impact. I think a lot of people will find your insights helpful and certainly find your passion inspiring. To our listeners, thank you for being here. And please, if you like our content, we'd love it if you'd give us a subscribe or a like or a review on your podcast platform of choice. And we'd love it if you'd share us with a friend. To the founders out there, don't forget to join the Mental Health Startup Slack community, which you can also find a link to in the show notes. And check out the What If Fellowship program, which is an 8-week accelerator program that we run out of our venture fund for early stage mental health and digital health founders. You can learn more about that in the show notes. You can find it on the What If VC website under the fellowship tab as well. So definitely check that out. Finally, we want to hear from our listeners. Please do comment on social media. Let us know what you liked, what you want to hear more of, what you disagreed with. You can reach out to us on Twitter at StigmaCast, on Instagram at Stigma Podcast. You can email us info@stigmapodcast.com. We definitely want to hear from you. Thank you for being here. And until next time, stay safe, be well, and thank you so much for your support.